This is Peter Hamilton, and you're watching, maybe listening, to a documentary business webinar, not from the Cannes Croisette, but from Brooklyn, New York. I'm thrilled that Wendy Bernfeld is joining me today to pull apart key issues and opportunities related to SVOD, AVOD, FAST, and more. Wendy, great to have you with us.
It's great to be here with you, Peter. Hi from Amsterdam. And it's only a few weeks ago since we were at MIPCOM, and it was a really exploding market. I found lots of meetings, lots of interest in the topics. And thanks to you for arranging that and for arranging today.
Wendy, you gave a really wonderful standing-only presentation at MIPCOM, and that's what we're going to recapture as best we can in our webinar. And just briefly to introduce you, you have more than 25 years experience in rights strategy and management. You're a former Canal Plus and Alliance Atlantis executive, and as you mentioned, you're based in Amsterdam. So, Wendy, let's go to the contents. What are we going to talk about today?
Well, we'll be looking at the different VODs, you know, the TVOD, SVOD, AVOD, FAST, but also the pitfalls and practicalities around them. What are they? What windows are they in? Who's buying? And eventually, how do we reach them? Are there some tips or practical approaches for reaching many of these platforms who are not often at markets?
So let's start with definitions, because it's really confusing. There are too many VODs and they overlap and get in each other's way, and they certainly confuse a lot of producers and people involved in the business. So let's go to definitions.
Sure. So we're all familiar, of course, with subscription VOD when you think Netflix or Amazon Prime or Curiosity Stream. But more recently, and AVOD, which is ad-supported VOD, like YouTube. But the blurring has come in where SVODs, like a Netflix or a Disney Plus, have added AVOD, but it's not really AVOD. It's ad-supported tiers. And practically speaking, this is important for producers because it is an AVOD. It's still part of a subscription. So for example, if a Netflix retail price is $10, and if you subscribe to the AVOD tier, it's $6, it is still subscription VOD that you are granting as a right. And that's a distinction from actual AVOD, where no subscription fee is paid. The consumer just watches on demand a video. There's ads before, during, and or after. And the most recent development, I think, that people were buzzing about, but it's really everything old is new again, is this buzzword FAST, free ad-supported streaming television. Effectively, it's linear programming, scheduled, lean back, kind of like old-fashioned free TV. There are ads, but the consumer shouldn't be able, if you're granting fast rights, they shouldn't be able to rewind or fast forward. At that point, it becomes a VOD. So I think what's important for the producers in the audience is, if you are on the platform side, often they will ask for AVOD/FAST as if it's one thing. And it kind of needs to be from a consumer-friendly point of view. But when you're granting the rights and getting paid, hopefully, for those rights, I would encourage you to treat AVOD separately from FAST and get both, if applicable. So those are some interesting angles to keep in mind in the rights.
So the age of the documentary matters. Is that the next point we'd like to take? You've produced a film, and the date of its completion really impacts the platform that you would chase.
Yeah, and in a way, it's not that different from the traditional world. Something brand new, premium launching is different than something a few years old or much older. And in the rights point of view, I use kind of a rough rule of thumb. Please understand that it fluctuates depending on the film, the platform, and the circumstances and the money you're paid. But generally, the newest stuff is still premium and follows either the traditional route or a premium SVOD type of approach. But the sweet spot for SVOD, particularly overseas and in international, are films that are, say, between films or programs that are 3 to 8 years old, roughly. Because that is a perfect window for platforms to buy a kind of a library title. It's still new in those markets, hasn't been shown, or it's a second window. But at that point, the deal is non-exclusive, friendlier, and you can do multiple deals at the same time. And usually the rule of thumb is if it's more than 8 years old, it would then go to AVOD or now FAST. Kind of like moving through theatrical video, pay per month, pay TV, and then free TV, sort of parallel. The only thing I wanted to encourage is that this is blurring. It's not a hard and fast rule. So some of the AVOD and FAST platforms, as you may have read in the press, are buying newer works, paying a lot of money, buying exclusives, not just non-exclusive. And some are also funding originals. So these lines blur, but as a general rule of thumb, if it's a brand new movie, you want to try and go through the premium and SVOD windows before you stick the show on AVOD. Because once it's on AVOD and given away free, then it's very difficult to get a prior window like an SVOD buyer platform to pay for it. So unless it's a deliberate marketing strategy, such as impact films, where reach is more important than money and windowing, these are good rules to keep in mind.
Wendy, what's the impact of the writers' strike on the demand for documentary and unscripted programs?
Well, I mean, the irony, aside from the tragedy of it all, there's a perception that nobody's buying, because there's no all rights deals in the traditional way while the strike is going on or everything is paused. But the irony is that actually, just like during COVID, many of the platforms have had to thus increase, filling out their programming because they're not doing originals or they don't have as much new production. So in our world, we've seen a big spike in buying in all genres, including documentary, and usually the title's 3 to 8 years old, because they want to fill that space and keep refreshing the content. So at least there's a small light in this tunnel that works you've done a few years ago might have a home that they didn't have, a few years ago.
That's a really good takeaway. So Wendy, a couple of examples of AVOD platforms that are actually commissioning originals right now that are jumping to the head of the queue, if you wish.
Well, first you would go through obviously the tier 1 types, the Netflix, Amazon types, and then the tier 2 competitors, telecom, cable operators in SVOD, pay TV operations, who have SVODs of their own. They are buying as well as funding, and examples of those competitors in that world would be, Videoland in Holland, Crave in Canada, Sky, Canal Plus, MultiChoice or Mnet, Stan in Australia. These are kind of mainstream tier 2 competitors to the big 5. And the tier 3 types are the thematic or complementary platforms that are niche, and some of them are 100% documentary, like a Curiosity Stream or Docsville. But many of those are still SVOD. You were asking about the AVOD buyers and funders. It's rare, but it includes currently Roku, Tubi, Pluto, that kind of world. They're still more focused generally on mainstream. But there are big splashy originals or exclusives in the sector. I still think your best target at the moment would be the SVODs for newer work, where they will either buy exclusive or non-exclusive, or they will fund originals or co-fund.
Interesting. So there are a great number of thematic documentary channels. You mentioned Docsville. There are many others. They've been we're grateful for their sponsorship of our newsletter. Are they paying license fees in general, or what's the revenue model with these documentary specialist?
Yeah,
odds?
well, it might be useful to think first about the business models in those windows before we jump to the doc specific ones. I think in general, the mainstreamers in SVOD will of course pay a flat fee, with some exceptions where they're very huge and then a revenue share makes sense. You know, if you have 50 million households in America, it's different than a small niche SVOD platform in Spain. So my general rule for SVOD is to try and get a license fee, a flat license fee, not a rev share, when licensing to an SVOD platform. And similarly in AVOD, or at least a minimum guarantee. But in the thematic sector, you'd have some, we mentioned Curiosity Stream, we mentioned Docsville, but there are others, Insight TV, for example, Canal Plus, Sky Docs, Docubay in India, a Guide Doc in Spain, and they all have different business models.
By the way, we met Al Jazeera Documentary in MIPCOM, and they're very active buyers for the Arabic-speaking market in the Middle East, North Africa territory. That's
another example, also Arte. And I think most of them, if it's an SVOD, will pay a flat license fee. Some will pay only a rev share or an MG with a rev share. So it's very hard to generalize, but I'm giving you the other idea, which is to try to match your film to the personality of the documentary site. So, you know, Insight might be more of a millennial, fast-paced action type of nonfiction, while Curiosity Stream could be more educational. Docsville may have more character-driven docs. So depending on your matchmaking, you might be able to sell the same title to 5 or 6 SVODs at the same time within that niche, but also in the window before to the tier 2s. It's just a matter of proper matchmaking.
So if you sell to multiple SVODs, is the principal division line between them is territory, or is it?
No, I'm afraid that's that's the other challenge for traditional versus digital distribution. Most of the platforms, unless they are only in one region, have multiple regions. So having just a territory breakdown can limit you quite a lot. You therefore have to cobble together your different deals. You know, as an example, Curiosity Streams in 200 countries. Sky is in the UK, Italy, and Germany, but also has Sky Showtime in 22 European countries. You know, DocPlay is only in Australia and New Zealand. So when you are doing a deal, it's less about the one country and more about the reach of the platform, its audience, and being able to toggle the windows with that. So for example, we had someone who had an offer from Pluto, Spain, and they had a Spanish rep, and the Spanish rep was selling the doc. But then you have to step back and go, wait a minute, Pluto's in 50 other countries. And that particular Spanish rep didn't have the rights beyond Spain. But the parent, Pluto, which is, of course, owned by Paramount, would have many more regions. So it's handier to be able to reach multiple regions, even if your entry point is only in one country.
Interesting. So the ideal then is to license your program to a platform that is securing worldwide rights. Is that a better strategy, or is it too complex to do this territory by territory kind of distribution deal?
Yeah, again, it's very dependent on the nature of the film and film or television program and platform. So normally, I think if your program matches, you would begin with the big five. You'd begin with the global platforms.
Right.
That doesn't mean that you have to accept the deal. But at least you can quantify, will they buy it? Will they buy it for all regions, and what price? But also coming with it, what are the stings in the tail, the rights limits, and the inability to do other regions or countries or festivals? This would be fleshed out even to rule out either you take the deal or you rule it out, or you're not accepted. If you're not accepted in a tier 1, then you move to, in my view, tier 2, the telecom, cable, OTT competitors that are head-on in the region against the Netflix, Amazon, Disney Plus types, but they are not multi-region. And in that scenario, you may have 5 different tier 2 deals covering the world, instead of one deal covering the world, or instead of like 200 individual small country deals. So a tier 2 makes sense. And at the same time, some of the platforms that are purely thematic, like 100% doc, they tend to be global. They'll want global rights. Whether they pay for them or not, you have to window and be careful to carve out if you have a better deal in a prior region window. So sometimes you can do a deal with a, as a random example, guide doc in Spain, but then you'd have to carve out France because you've already got an exclusive in France, that sort of thing.
It's complicated deal making. You say here, help do the buyer's job. What do you mean?
I think it's because 70% of the time over the past 20 years, I'm actually working as a buyer for platforms.
Yeah.
And the other third of the time for sellers or rights holders. But what it means is that you really can get into the head of the buyer. Often the disturbing thing I experience, hell, maybe your own audience experiences it when they go to markets, is getting 4,000 emails. You just sort of MailChimp pitches about movies and series. And what I feel works better is never to do that, and to first look at the platform you're trying to sell to, actually open the homepage and look at the programming. Try and find a few other films on the platform that already are programmed in that genre. If it's about refugees, if it's about Gaza, if it's about climate, find a few and say, hey, we notice that you've got these 3 films already programming from what I can see over here. We feel this one, ours, will be a good complement. We can program it there. Or we see you don't have any, any films or programs in this topic. And is that on purpose, or would you consider opening a new category? And that type of tailored letter, kind of like online dating, really matching, those types of one-page emails get read and answered by the buyers. Remember that most of them are not at markets and festivals. They don't necessarily know your name, the name of the film, the name of the company, just like you don't always know the name of that platform. So you're trying to help do the job for them by showing them where it can be programmed. Often all you need is a one-pager, like a one sheet and a trailer. Don't send the whole movie unless asked. And by movie, every time I say film or movie, I also mean program if it's television. But trying to put yourself in the buyer's head and looking at what they're already programming will those sorts of mails get read.
That's really interesting. You know, we publish our Netflix database, and I encourage anybody who's considering pitching Netflix to study the database, because they're going to find out exactly what you said. Are there complementary programs that you can hook your pitch to? Or secondly, is there a gap
that you can fill?
A history that you can fill. And if any of our listeners or excuse me, viewers want to track that, you can find it on our documentary business website.
That's brilliant. Also, I just think that with the platforms that aren't as well known, like if you don't know the name, you know, Netflix, they all have homepages and programming and Wikipedias and LinkedIn's, and you can figure out which one is really a match. So if, you know, Insight is only millennial, fast-paced or whatever, don't send them a documentary on Polish architecture during the war in the 1800s. You know, just try and match the personality. And although it takes more of your time at first, and by you, it can be you or your rep, if you have a sales rep, sales agent, distributor, just trying to properly match make works better than having it in a huge catalog buried or just mass mailing.
Right. I agree. It's just so important to think through what your buyer wants. As you say, do the buyer's thinking for them. But listen, the next question I have, Wendy, and I know you hit that up on your slide, is do you do this yourself, or do you approach the buyers through a third party? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's an interesting period now. It depends on the producer's goals. Some are increasingly interested in having more control of, or at least oversight into, their own distribution, while others are quite happy just make the movie, hand it off, and move on to someone else. But you can't have it both ways. If one has delegated the film for a decade to somebody else, you can't necessarily be complaining about that they're not doing anything with it. So what we found...
You can complain all you want, but you won't necessarily get anywhere, right?
Yeah, so what I'm a bit of a black sheep. I believe in a hybrid distribution where, for example, I don't do theatrical or conventional television deals, but I'm very core into the streamers here and abroad. Your traditional sales agents, I believe you have to interview when you're looking at giving your film. How active are they in digital, and what is digital to them? Is it just the big five, Netflix, Amazon, or what else have they done beyond that? And how close are they? And does it matter? Because for you, it may not matter, but for others, it will. But at least you become more aware of the questions to ask. Some sales agents are extremely open now and eager to go beyond the normal suspects, and they partner up with types like me in a hybrid distribution where it's almost like who sleeps with who. Oh, we know the PBS people and you know the Mnet people, and you just maximize the exploitation. And the theory of that hybrid distribution is 100% of 0-0. You know, if you've given the rights to anyone 100% and they're not maximizing it, you're not making any money, but frankly, neither are they, and you're not reaching the audience. So just being able to do it together is helpful, but many producers we work with do it themselves in the sense that they hire a consultant type like Peter or Wendy. They do work to write the letters and look up the platforms that they're introduced to, and then they back channel with the consultant to find out if the offer is a good one, how to benchmark it. What's the deal terms, the pricing, how does it fit in a doc in Finland, a doc in France on a platform? So it's a mix.
That's really interesting, Wendy. So your advice is be careful granting all rights, all territories for 10 years to one distributor or an agent. See if you can work with them to divide the opportunity such that they're working in the areas in which they're strongest, and they're partnering and splitting in some way the compensation or with an agent or distributor who's got a powerful reputation in another area. Is that that's your core advice, really?
I think in this period of interim, the coming few years, where all the windows and rights are blurring and where the platforms are connected to traditional players as well as distinct, you really need a mix of skill sets, contacts, and intel. And I do believe joining forces is best, but not all traditional types will do that. So then you have to decide if that's important, or if you can't sort of legally carve the rights and share them, then you may have to, with bargaining power, give full rights away to somebody, but find out how open they are case by case to opening up if you, the producer, bring new deals to the table with efforts that they have not done or contacts they haven't done, then they can make room for that rather than a full-on rights grant or block.
Really powerful advice. I mean, filmmakers need to get into the weeds. You know, if they're expecting to hand over responsibility for rights and move distribution and move on to their next project and wait for checks, they're not going to get the maximum return on their effort. On the other hand, it's a lot of work. You know, you've made the film, you want to get on with your life, and here you are, you know, doing a lot of management, a lot of marketing, as you say, do the buyer's job for them. It's a tricky road.
It's a tricky road, and I think it's the other thing that's going on is the morphing of the buyers. You know, if you've got a Pluto, which is part of Paramount Plus, which is part of then Sky Showtime, for example, you know, some people will have contacts with different elements in the same corporate group. And being able to make sure that all the windows are being at least tapped, even if they don't accept the deal or buy the film, then you know you are really out there being seen business to business. And a lot of these new AVOD and FAST platforms, which you know in the States, Samsung, Tubi, Pluto, Freevee is Amazon, of course, Roku, those are the names that you would know in the States, but they're really spreading over into Europe, BBC, TF1, FilmRise. You know, there's a lot of European fast channels and AVOD opportunities this year that weren't there 6 months ago.
Yeah.
Just don't want to sell too quickly to an AVOD in another country until you've explored the SVODs first, I guess. Yeah.
Well, this is really helpful. Wendy, we could talk a lot more. We could get deeper into this, but viewers can contact you. And so your company is called The Right Stuff?
No, we're Right Stuff.
Right Stuff.
Yeah. And
you can be reached at, I've got your email up here, wbernfeld@rights-stuff.com. And Wendy, Wendy, thank you. It was really great presenting with you at MIPCOM. We had a fantastic audience there, and I'm really glad we've had an opportunity to catch up and share your wisdom, which is very powerful, understand the rights, help the buyer, and be aggressive about segmenting rights in the ways that best suit the potential of the project. I mean, I hope I summarized carefully, but they're my big takeaways.
Yeah, and just in a way, watch out for the buzzwords and personalize the pitches. I think that's the hardest change, but it really pays off.
Personalize the pitches. Wendy, great to have you on our documentary business webinar, and I know we'll do this again because the world will have changed in 6 months. You can bet on that.
Yes, thank you so much, Peter. It's a pleasure.